Moses says, beware of the desires of your heart. Okay? It's a photograph of Moses, right? Like beware the desire, good old Chuck. Like that's beware the desires of your heart. That's the cadence today, and that's from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17 is where we're getting that from. And we're going to kind of unpack this along. So, as sermons goes, this one is kind of dense. All right? So, we'll try to keep up, but I'll try to keep it light and lively all at the same time. I have personal experience with this phrase, beware the desires of your heart. I think we all kind of do, but mine was, it centers around this picture right here. This is, do you recognize the big tall guy there? Yeah, that's the guy who preached at the installation here. That's Mark. And that's Coley and his wife, Amy. We were all in Seattle together. That's where he was a pastor out there in Seattle. This was a couple years ago. And we had a mutual friend who was getting married also in Seattle. So it was a good excuse to go see the West Coast and all of that. And we had a great time. We were doing the downtown Seattle thing after our friend got married. And we were just hanging around. And it was a Sunday. We did it after church. That's when we did it. It was after church on a Sunday, and we're going around, and it was kind of getting to the end of the day, and we're like, well, we need to eat somewhere, and we're kind of looking on our phones, looking on Google Maps for different places, and we're like, oh, there's a Brazilian steakhouse. Now, have you guys ever been to a Brazilian steakhouse? So you know what's going on with Brazilian steakhouses, right? Like, it's basically people coming over to your table, all you can eat, and with meat, various meats on swords, and like cutting it off, like slices off for you, and so that you can eat them. Glorious place. I have a picture of this, right? Like, so, yeah, so big old piece of meat on there, but it's expensive. It's expensive, right? And so it was like, I think it was on sale. I think they were having a sale that day, and it was like $40 a plate, all right? Just it's all you can eat. It's all you can eat, and it's just, like this isn't Golden Corral prices, right? Like it's also not Golden Corral meats. Like, and so we were having a good time there, but I have this phrase that keeps coming up: beware the desires of your heart. And our desires of our heart that day was for filet. All right, filet. Now, filet is not a cheap meat, right? They don't bring it around all the time. They do bring around the pork all the time. Like they're always like pawning off pork on you, coming around you, and you get like a slice of it. And they gave us filet like right at the beginning, right when we sat down, and we were waiting for it to come around again, and we just kept on eating and eating and eating, like so much. And the guy eventually comes over, and we were full, we were stuffed, and the guy goes, "What are you guys waiting for?" And we're like, "We're waiting for the filet." And he's like, "Oh, all right." And he left, and a couple minutes later he came out, and Mark and I both yelled out, "Filet!" As he's walking back, and we ate our filet. And this is actually the picture there, and you can also tell in that picture Coley has had enough, right? Like that's like, she's like, "It's time to go." And so they're like, it's like filet and all that. And after we were done eating, Mark and I kind of quick made a calculation of how much meat we ate. We estimate that we ate about 30 ounces of meat. Beware the desires of your heart. Right? Like, because we left the restaurant and we were like feeling pretty bad. But if you've ever been to Seattle, it's on, a hill going down into the Puget Sound. And we were getting on the ferry to go across to his side of the Puget Sound, and we go down to the bottom, and it's going okay. We're walking. We're really full, but we're walking, and then there's a ramp going onto the ferry. All right? Now, to that point, I had never eaten so much that it hurt to walk uphill. Like my abdomen felt like I was going to burst. I was just like, and I thought I was alone in this, and I looked back at Mark, and he's in the same predicament. Like, it's like I was like 30 at the time, and we're just like, and then we sat down on the ferry, and it just like, I just want to lay down, but that's socially unacceptable right now. Like that's just, it was just awful, and we need to remember that we need to beware the desires of our hearts, right? Beware the desires of your heart. That's good advice from old Moses there. right? Like that's what he says in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17. And he says something very specifically kind of interesting. He says, beware lest you say in your heart, my power and my might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. Like he's saying, beware that you don't say, like, I have done this. Beware the desires of your heart. So you got to understand what this is coming from. Moses here is right now. When I say Moses is writing, I understand completely that he's writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So don't think I'm not saying that, all right? But we also understand that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, okay? So just clarifying for those that are like, I don't like it when he says Moses. You know, like I'm just clarifying. I believe fully in the inspiration. I believe in it so strongly that I think it's still a connect in you when you talk to your neighbors, okay? So, Moses says, beware lest you say in your heart, my power and my might have gotten me this wealth. And here's what he's saying. Moses in chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9, and basically all of Deuteronomy is telling them the story of how God has saved them, how he has taken them from slavery in Egypt and has done all these amazing things to save them. And he's saying, like, you need to remember that God is saving you. And Moses is saying, like, you got to be aware that it's not... All right, I'm good. He's saying, you got to be aware of the desires of your heart. And he keeps telling them the old story. Like, he's like, remember, you were in Egypt, and God pulled you out of Egypt. He pulled you out of Egypt, and he pulled you out of there, and he keeps telling them that story. But he also, we know the story well, right? He says, God pulled you out of Egypt. Now, what did they say when God pulled them out of Egypt? Yeah, like, what? Yeah. He's like, we'd rather be in Egypt. That's what the Israelites said. They said it twice. Once before they crossed the Red Sea and once afterwards. Ungrateful people, right? Like that's like they said to God, they said to Moses, like, Moses, like, this is the most sarcastic statement ever. Like, Moses, were there not enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out into the desert to die? Yeah, that's sarcastic as sarcastic comes, right? Like, were there not enough graves in Egypt? And then they're like, after they crossed the Red Sea, they said, like, at least we had hot food in Egypt. We never ever want to go back, do we? We never want to go back to security that we had in the past or to a perceived time that was better. I've never heard the statement, it was so much better that when blank come out of anyone here. That's true, because I've only been here like a month. But I know it's come out, because I know people. Life was so much better back when, fill in the blank, right? Like, if life could just get back to then life would be so much better. When you're saying that, you're wishing for Egypt. You're wishing for Egypt. And you know what else you're wishing for? You're wishing that God had not put you where you are right now, with the predicament and whatever situation you're in right now. Because God has you in here so that you can bring hope and restoration. And that you can be used right where you are. And by saying, I wish I could just go back, you're just telling yourself a lie about the force. Now, I realize that I'm a 35, when I'm not even 35 yet, I'm 34-year-old is telling you that you don't need to think about going back. But you don't. It's a lie that the evil one tells to you to keep you discontent with where God has you right now. I know that may be uncomfortable, but it's true. Were there not enough graves in Egypt? Moses. All right? Ooh, bam, right? So then what do? So they cross the Red Sea. Moses goes on top of Mount Sinai, right? He goes on top of Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments. He's up there for a bit longer than all the Israelites want him to be. And what do? Do they wait patiently for Moses to come back? No. They build a golden calf and say, that's what saved us from Egypt. And we look back at that and they're like, what? Come on, guys. Why are you saying that that's the God that saved you? We know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the God that saved you. I mean, we've never done anything like that before, right? We've never made idols out of anything when our life isn't going the way we seem, right? We don't watch daily our pension plans and how they did on the stock market that day, do we? No, not at all. We don't check out Yahoo or Google Finance every day. No, we don't do that. We didn't when we were younger, or maybe if you're still working. We didn't pine after the other job. My life would be so much better if I just had that other job. And certainly we don't talk ill of other people who support another political candidate that we don't agree with. We don't do that at all, ever. Yeah, ever. We don't make idols out of anything anymore, do we? Yeah, I'm being sarcastic. Some of you may not have a sarcastic bone. I got to find you. I'm being sarcastic. We make idols out of everything. Right? And we're just like these people. We're just like them. And yet, God still saves them. And Moses is telling this story. He's like, look at all the stuff that you guys did. And yet, God still saw you through it. And we could talk for hours. I could talk for hours about everything that he did in the wilderness. And Moses is saying, listen, you're about to go into the new land. Oh, yeah, I have this. You're about to go into the new land. And it's going to be great, but you need to remember who our God is. Now, all right, you ready for this? It's history lesson time. He's saying you got to remember who God is. There's a verse, you guys all know what John 3:16 is, right? For God so loved the world. It's kind of like our big verse. They had one in the Old Testament too. It's Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Have you guys ever heard this before? It's called the Great Shema, all right? Shema means, hey, listen up in Hebrew, okay? Hey, listen up. It says here, but that actually translated here is, hey, listen up, Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Did you ever hear Jesus quote that before? Remember when the rich young man came up to him? And he had him summarize the entire thing? He quoted this. It's the John 3:16 verse of the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. The Lord our God, listen up, people of God. Our Lord is one. And he's saying this, he's telling this whole story about how they've done all of this. They kept on rebelling, and they kept on rebelling, but God has kept on saving them. He keeps on saving them. And he says it for this reason. He goes, beware lest you say in my heart, my power and my might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, and that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers to this day. He even says all kinds of wild and crazy things here. He says, you guys are about to go into the land flowing with milk and honey. I mean, we're familiar with those stories, right? Joshua in the Battle of Jericho, all those things. He says, you're about to go take this land that's flowing with milk and honey. You're going to take it. It's going to become yours. You're going to have wells that you didn't dig. You're going to have cities that you didn't build. You're going to have all of this. Beware the desires of your heart, and that you say that I am the one that has built this. Remember that it is God that has saved you. It's God that saves you. It's he that is bringing you through it, so beware the desires of your heart. And we know the story. What happened? They go into the land of the milk and honey, and does things go well for them? No, right? They go after the desires of their heart, right? They follow after other gods. they end up not doing everything the way they should, and they end up in captivity. And we know that story, right? And they end up being captive to Rome. And then all of a sudden, this story starts happening again. It's recorded in Matthew's gospel that all of a sudden, this guy Jesus is born. And if you remember, he had to flee to Egypt because Herod was killing all these baby boys. That sounds like that guy, right? Moses. All of a sudden, he had to flee to Egypt to get away from all dying, right? And then out of Egypt, Jesus comes. And after Jesus comes out of Egypt, what happens in Matthew? Do you remember? He gets baptized, right? Baptism in the Lutheran service it's compared to the Red Sea. The Red Sea crossing. And then after he's baptized, where does Jesus go? Into the wilderness. For how long? 40 days. The story is being told again. And Matthew is ringing a bell. And we should hear that story. We should hear the bell. It's like, in Exodus, God saved his people. Even when they weren't being all that holy and good, he saved his people. He saved it, and it's happening again, but this time in the wilderness. When Jesus is in the wilderness, does he fall to the temptations? No, he doesn't. He doesn't fall at all. You see, Satan came up to Jesus, and he tried to get rid of that oneness of God. He tried to get Jesus to say, yeah, I want more power. I need to stop humbling myself, right? I want more power. I need to get rid of the one. I need to push back the oneness of God. But he wouldn't do it. And Jesus kept his humble demeanor all the way to the cross. And he died on the cross so that at his death, every knee would be able to bow and every tongue would confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. You see, he starts telling the story from the Old Testament again. He starts telling it again. Yet this time, the story isn't foiled. And that story becomes our story. So that we can look back again and go, that's my story. That God took me out of the slavery of my sin, the slavery out of whatever I was doing to idolize, to save myself. He's taken me out of that, and he's made me his, and he's put me in his kingdom. That's what the imagery is that Jesus' death and resurrection is him taking you out of slavery and saying, you are now in the kingdom of God. You've been given everything in the kingdom. So Christians in the room today, you can rest. Yes, sometimes we pine for the life of past when we're actually in control, right? But we're in the kingdom today. And we can rest. We can rest because God came and he told the story perfectly. And he's made the story our story too. So that we can rest in his name and in his salvation. We've been given everything. So this sermon series is about generosity. And to end here, we've been given everything. God is holding you tight. He's told the story again so that you know that you are saved by him. And he told it again so that it would make us generous. That we would not hold what we have with clenched fingers, but we would hold them with open palms. That's generous with our wealth, but it's also generous with our wealth, with our time and our actions. That we would be people that would give. To give away everything that we have. Because we know that our God has told the story. And we as one people can say, here our God is one. He is one and we are one with him. Because he has saved us. And that's pretty much the sermon today. Let's say a prayer.